Welcome to the Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group podcast. Today, we have two special guests participating in our podcasts. They are Jan Schott, researcher of the Asia Research Program of the ADASTRA think tank, and Anton Ganotsky, expert of the same program. Over the past months, the global stage has been unusually tense. Trade disputes, shifting alliances, and renewed military posturing have all added new layers to the already complex US-China relationship. Against this backdrop, Beijing held one of its most important political gatherings of the decade, the fourth plenum of the 20th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. The plenum set the tone for China's next five-year plan, highlighting a clear set of priorities: technological self-reliance, internal stability, and national security, all framed by Xi Jinping's message that the international environment is entering a period of turbulence and transformation. This wasn't just bureaucratic language. It came amid escalating frictions with Washington over microchips, rare earths, and artificial intelligence, a slowing Chinese economy under pressure from Western tariffs, and an increasingly fragmented global order. At the same time, Beijing has been strengthening ties with Moscow and caught in the global south, positioning itself as a counterweight to what it calls the Western-dominated system. Meanwhile, in Washington, the Trump administration has been doubling down on tariffs and signaling a harder stance on technology export, even as it seeks a political win ahead of the next year's elections. All that makes the Trump-Xi summit far more than a routine diplomatic meeting. So, I would like to ask my first question to Yan. Tell us, please, what strategic course has Beijing set after the party plenum, and how might it shape China's approach towards the United States?
Sure. First, I think I need to actually clarify and say a few words about the plenum itself. This has been the first plenum which set the strategic economic vision of China for the next 5 years, starting from the 2026 spring when the communique of the plenum will be actually implemented. Uh, I have to make a few remarks regarding this plenum. Typically, the fourth plenum actually usually focuses on issues of governance and frequently a party governance in particular. It's typically the fifth plenum where the Chinese Communist Party ends up focusing on outlining its 5-year plan. But in 2023, instead of the third plenum, we thought the Central Conference on Work relating to the foreign affairs focus on issues of foreign affairs, actually, and ultimately shifting the political calendar. The reason for that is Beijing apparently knew it would face a turmoil year ahead with those elections in Taiwan and the United States. So, in the retrospect, I think it was a good decision, actually, in terms of the outlook. Another singularity of the plenum and a lot of things that many experts and scholars actually paid attention is that it was probably the one plenum with the fewest attendees, since a lot of the plenums, a lot of People's Liberation Army officials has been purged and target of a year-long anti-corruption drive. In the case of civil servants, the official communique confirmed the exposure of 11 full Central Committee members and 4 alternative members. Overall, in terms of strategic set, as a result of this plenum, China showed its strategic consistency and willingness to tackle the problems it currently faces, such as low fertility or slowing economic growth. It hasn't really changed much, but rather sends signals to Washington and other capitals on the West. The overall conclusion of the plenum is that China and Chinese economics are actually on the right track, which has been emphasized by the confidence of Xi and his lieutenants. In terms of main directions, AI and computing power would continue to be the major area of focus from 2026 onward. The plenum also designated the space sector as a top priority for the first time, actually, pledging to turn China into a leading spacefaring nation over the next 5 years till the 2030. This reflects one of the changes between has been made, that the leadership is putting economic security on the equal footing with prospective generation now. The current intense focus on addressing technological choke points reflects Beijing's concerns about the extent of the country's dependence on the overseas supply for high-end technologies. Speaking of international environment, there is some ambiguity in the Chinese position, I would say, rather. Officials noted a complex and severe international environment, but called for dialogue with the United States rather than the decoupling and confrontation, which means China would rather want to preserve its favorable position in the international system and trade rather than undermine it. However, I would say from the results of the plenum and the communique itself. On the other hand, Beijing assesses how volatile Trump's administration is in the decision making and not really sure about shows its inconsistency in terms of what we have to expect in the next 5 years. Uh, Officials pledged also it's the last to continue their crackdown on involution, a reference to the fierce internal competition that has produced damaging price wars and oversupply. However, I remember these talks about a great priority in enhancing the domestic market and especially boosting domestic consumption for most of the past year, actually. But there has been very little following throughout this past year.
Thank you. Shifting our discussion towards the summit between Trump and Xi Jinping, I would like to ask what were the expectations from the summit in the United States and China, and how do the country's media portray it? And nevertheless, have these expectations met the reality after the summit? And maybe you could slightly comment on the results of this meeting.
Well, I think here I will mostly focus on the Chinese perspective since I think it's the most consequential one. Uh, because first, in terms of US, you have a lot of outlets that have been portraying the summit not drastically different, but in some sort of different perspective. But the overall expectation from the summit was quite the same. Uh, First, it wasn't really clear whether Trump and Xi would meet each other since Trump was stopped in his visit to the IPEC summit at all after, say, writing in his Truth Social account that he's going to impose 100% tariffs on Chinese goods. There was really doubts by saying whether it's really a need for meeting with Xi on the APEC summit. But actually, Xi and Trump just had a meeting in Busan today instead of the Gyeongju when the APEC summit actually situating. So I'll apparently turn to China right now. In terms of portraying from a Chinese perspective, the Politburo and Xi in particular showed the level of confidence ahead of the summit, which was quite clear in the results of the plenum, which was expressed in the communique, which will be implemented in 2026. Moreover, there is a theory that the plenum itself had tried to be organized as close to the date of the summit as possible, though October, maybe November, is the usual date of the plenum in overall in China, Chinese calendar. However, since the 5-year document is not a tactical document, and by this I mean, well, actually, it wasn't written and signed just happened Trump and Xi meeting in South Korea, but the one that defines Chinese politics for the years ahead. I think that this document is really laying out the party's feeling and its assessment, more importantly, of its objective state right now. And Xi Jinping seemed very confident, and his lieutenants would echo that sentiment as well. Um, it even takes a quite an audacious form, I would say. For instance, I would like to mention one officials from the Central Commission on Economics and Finance of China saying China is well positioned to take the initiative in the shaping the external environment and expanding its international room for the maneuver. So it's something that hasn't been actually said before. It's quite spectacular, actually. Another quote, which I think is from Minister of Commerce, Wang Wentao, citing Xi Jinping, saying Xi Jinping has emphasized that in the past, our opening up was about running behind or following, but now our opening must take a lead. So that's a quite drastic shift from what we've heard about the peaceful rising of China to taking a more assertive moves, I would rather say. One of the reasons for that, I think, is that Chinese officials feel that they are those who actually have a cards right now. Just a few weeks ahead of the summit, China rolled out these rare earth export controls on US, and I think it shows that confidence and the moves are downstream of the assessment by basically, and they think like, yes, now it's the time to take an initiative. Thus, that means that Chinese officials are actually feel quite good about the progress that has been made for the past 5 years, despite even the slow in economic growth and real estate crisis. What I actually think Chinese officials want to say by this is that yes, there are real challenges, but at this moment of time, we are well equipped to navigate these challenges actually. And this confidence wasn't observed even the last year or so. I remember scholars and even Chinese policymakers itself express quite the feeling of uncertainty rather than this confidence. This feels very much like just in the last few weeks in the run up to the meeting. Like Xi Jinping has moved from playing defense for most of the past year and reacting to the US policy moves to now he's playing more offensive. That's really reminds me of the first Xi Jinping term from 2013 to, I guess, 2017, when the US policymaker, there was an interviews of US policymakers saying they were waking up every morning, they were just waiting for what she's gonna say this time. In terms of the outcomes of the summit, uh, we haven't seen that actually assertiveness of China. And apparently, in this case, they decided to take their old stance of stringing Trump by like muzzling Trump. Uh, so they saw the opportunity. Apparently, they saw the opportunity to communicate and agree on Trump. As the result of the summit, we've seen that Trump agreed to double down the tariffs on the level of 47% and take a hard stance on the fentanyl exports from the China. So I think that we actually have to wait at least few weeks for more information from that. Right now, the words and actions doesn't really match itself.
Thank you, Jan, very much. And now I'd like to slightly shift the scope of our podcast to Ukraine. And in this perspective, I'd like to ask Anton. So tell us, please, what outcomes this summit produced and what would each of them mean for Ukraine and for Eastern Europe?
As true from the very beginning, the meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping was ended up due to escalation of the trade war triggered by China's restriction of rare earth metal exports. Washington and Beijing managed to find a compromise solution in several problematic areas of their bilateral relations. One of the main outcomes of the summit can be considered China's decision to refrain from imposing stricter restriction on the export of rare earth elements for a year, which will ease access to these critical materials. This became a key achievement for Americans, along with China's agreement to resume large-scale purchases of American soybeans and other agricultural products. In response, President Trump announced the reduction of the tariffs on China's goods from approximately 57% to 47%. These steps will ease the economic confrontation between the United States and China, temporarily improving the state of the global economy. The parties also agreed to cooperate on drug control. In particular, China promised efforts to curb the flow of fentanyl precursors to the United States. The fentanyl problem, in which Chinese criminal groups are implicated, is one of the top priorities of Trump administration, making cooperation with Beijing on this issue crucial for White House. However, despite success in some areas, so the fundamental problems in United States-China relations remain unresolved, such as restriction on chips, the Taiwan issue, China's industrial overcapacity, and its export-oriented economic model. As for Ukraine, Trump said the war in Ukraine came up very strongly as an issue and that he and Xi had agreed to work together to make progress. However, he also said the two sides are locked in fighting and sometimes you got to let them fight, I guess. Classic Trump. He acknowledged China was a big buyer of Russian oil, but added to the topic was not discussed. The Chinese summary of the talks note that Trump was very enthusiastic about settling various regional hotspot issues and that China had also been promoted peace talks in various conflicts. However, I personally do not see that prospect of a more realistic Chinese involvement in the peace resolution of Russia-Ukrainian or the Russian-Ukrainian war. Since Beijing has not desired to pressure President Vladimir Putin to stop hostilities, I even believe that Xi Jinping would not be able to do so even if he wanted to. The strategic alliance between China and Russia aim to undermining American hegemony in Asia and Europe does not foresee a constructive role for Beijing in establish peace in Ukraine. And no matter how much President Trump tries to encourage China to work jointly towards suspending the Russian-Ukrainian war, Xi Jinping will not be convinced. If the United States were to impose sanctions on China over its import of Russian energy resources, China might slightly reduce the volume of such imports, but only marginally. For Xi Jinping, the export of Russian oil is not an economic matter, but rather of geopolitical one, a symbol of support for Russian regime.
Thank you, Anton. To sum up, I'd like to say that in the aftermath of the summit, maybe the one thing is clear: both Washington and Beijing left the table claiming success, yet few illusions remain about the depth of their rivalry. The real test now begins: whether the cautious signals of dialogue can evolve into a sustainable balance, or whether this meeting will be remembered as just another pause in a long strategic contest. So thank you for attending our podcast. Thanks to our experts today. So stay tuned and stay informed for the next Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group podcast.